Well, good morning, everybody.
We're starting already?
Yes, we're starting. It's 45. We are going to start in now, yes. And I mean, it really feels a bit like an early morning, and we are very grateful that you showed up after the party and for this early appointment. So we're going to try our best to really make this as informative and entertaining as possible, despite the seriousness of the things we're going to speak about. This is the panel on Beyond Ethics Washing. We're trying to discuss possibilities for responsible AI and data practices beyond ethics washing and trickle-down policy. And we have I find, fantastic group of speakers here. I'm very happy to see you all here. We have here David Graus, who's a lead data scientist at Randstad, Maria Koomen, who's leading the Open Governance Network, Paul Nemitz, who's the principal advisor on the digital transition at the EU Commission, and Iris Muis, who's the lead operations at the data school at Utrecht University and the data ethicist. It's an interesting time we live in, very exciting for everybody who has to do anything with AI and big data practices. Currently, we see a flabbergasting circus of tech bros touring countries and university campuses, indicating how dangerous the technology is they're developing and calling for regulation, while simultaneously also warning that if there might be effective regulation, they might even leave countries and won't be working there, which puts us in a predicament that our public discourse is more or less dominated by speculative technology and speculative impact rather than addressing the actual problems that we deal with today. So we're focusing on maybe problems in a maybe future while we have actual problems to solve at hand. And then there's the 5-year anniversary of the GDPR, which has been by critics called an implementation failure. And on the other hand, we have all seen, Iris and I, in our research in the Netherlands, that in anticipation of legislation, organizations did implement changes and did try to adhere to the coming regulation and then the actual regulation. We've seen how failures in using AI models in Finland, but also in the Netherlands, or especially in the Netherlands, have led to some significant changes in how administrations address these challenges. So while we are going to the speakers will present several examples from their respective areas of how to tackle the problem of ethical and responsible data and AI practices. But this panel also strives to discuss, and we hope that you can jump in there and think along with us and provide us with valuable input, how to develop a digital democracy, how to develop checks and balances that we have already developed for other technologies. We have these institutions in place, we have systems in place, how to adapt our existing democracies to digital societies while preserving the values of our open societies. I think of the role of fourth estate, advocacy, literacy, and so forth. So we have 6 minutes for each speaker, and we are starting with a statement by David Graus.
All right. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to have to break the no phone rule, as I have some notes that I need for my statement. Good. So one thing when we talk about this upcoming AI regulation is that I think it really speaks to the maturity of the field. So I work in data science at the global leader in the HR services industry, and I think that by now, like Mirko mentioned, partly due to scandals, but also partly due to the understanding that AI systems have an impact in the real world, we know that it is no longer appropriate to kind of design and build these systems in isolation in your own ethic, but this is becoming a multi-stakeholder endeavor. And I see this happening in our organization as well. And I see this happening across other organizations. So in a way, this is actually a very exciting development. And I think that it may mean that building compliant AI systems will take longer in the future. It will also increase adoption, it will increase understanding, and then ultimately also impact. So now I'd like to briefly sketch a few examples of my own practice in what we're doing in anticipation of this regulation, and also what we see are some of the challenges, and finally a few recommendations. So in terms of what we're doing, we've noticed that it really all starts with talking. So we kind of had this emerging situation of an AI ethics talking group, speaking with legal colleagues, with privacy officers, with data scientists, with product owners. And this was, well, also like Mirko mentioned, partly due to kind of the scandals that happened. So we realized that we have to do something about this and with this technology. Also, being a market leader in the HR domain, this is also about doing the right thing. I mean, we understand that these technologies can have a big impact. And actually, we believe at Randstad in always combining technology with the human touch. And this belief, this preceded the rise of AI. At the same time, I mean, there's more laws and regulations incoming, not just this AI regulation. So at Randstad, we're also kind of used to anticipating what is to come. Finally, like I said, I also see this outside of my organization. So I notice in the Netherlands that there's a few of these roundtable sessions we have with other big organizations where we try to collectively anticipate what is happening and kind of share knowledge of what everyone's doing. And then maybe already spoiling the surprise a bit, but there we see that we're all kind of at the same level. So everyone is excited about what is happening, trying to anticipate what it means for our respective businesses, but it's hard to really move beyond this talking phase. But beyond this talking phase, what we are doing, there's a few things that you can already try to do. So one is we're experimenting with AI impact assessment tools, one of which is the one developed by Iris and Mirko. We're setting up our own algorithmic registry and coming up with governance structures that kind of complement the existing ones. And the existing ones are very much privacy oriented, and we're trying to incorporate this notion of data ethics in these structures. Finally, we collaborate a lot with academia, so we either have research interns coming over, working with our data on bias and bias mitigation methods in algorithmic hiring, and we're also part of a larger European-funded research project on anti-discrimination in AI-driven hiring. So that's a bit the hands-on work we do. Then a few of the challenges we see. So the first challenge is really about definitions, and it starts with defining AI. And we notice that in practice that means it's very difficult for us to understand what are the projects that will fall in scope of this upcoming regulation. Of course, understanding that this definition is not set in stone yet, but we notice that it's really easy to reach out to the people who are intrinsically motivated and interested in this topic, but the ones that aren't are perhaps more important to reach. So this is one of the big challenges. Finally, lots of technical challenges, and maybe this is my technical perspective, but when I see some of the requirements, they do raise an eyebrow from time to time. So if I cite from the requirements for high-risk AI systems, one is that AI systems are to achieve appropriate levels of accuracy and robustness. Now, being in machine learning for a good few years, accuracy and kind of evaluation of machine learning models is highly complicated. One can always pick the right metric to tell the right story, so that's a bit of a challenge. Data sets are to be, and then I quote, relevant, representative, and error-free, and I think I can say that there is no such thing. Anyway, again, this is probably a very technical perspective, so the questions that pop in my mind are, how are we going to do this? A final challenge is the cultural challenge. So like I said, it starts with talking, it starts with reaching out to legal colleagues, to other people. And here you notice that kind of speaking each other's language is also a process that takes a long while. So you have to start talking, and you notice that this is a continuous conversation. You notice that with each initiative or project, it improves, but it remains a challenge. The final challenge is kind of this more high level, this kind of tension between, on the one hand, having a formal set of laws and regulations, and on the other hand, having a fuzzy set of ever-changing norms and values that you also have to define as an organization. So kind of that also makes it difficult to implement. So we don't have the solution either, but what we found that helps is to simply put it on the agenda. So like I said, we started these conversations a few years ago, and now the momentum is increasing. Actually, the whole ChatGPT hype also helped us a bit. If we are to believe the Gartner hype cycle, then this won't last for too long. But I would say take advantage while it lasts. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about the solution. But wrapping up, and this is probably an open door, and in particular in this audience, this is about togetherness, right? So this is about technologists working together with lawyers, working together with society. And finally, like I tried to illustrate, we see this within our organization, we see this across organizations, but in my personal opinion, not as much with policymakers as I'd like to see yet. And finally, what I hope to be able to express here is that as technologists, maybe I'm not speaking for everyone, but for a good few of us, we're really excited about what is to come, and actually these kind of regulations will also increase the importance of our work and bring many interesting problems to solve.
Thank you, David. Really interesting to hear that your organization actually does a number of things that we've seen do public administration organizations in the Netherlands as well. So maybe Iris, you are going to share some thoughts on how you do the work in the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you. David, also very interesting to hear your perspective coming from industry. I bring more the perspective from coming from a university, working, so the education perspective, also working a lot with government organizations in the Netherlands, so also bringing a little bit of this government perspective along. So two sides to the story. My name is Iris Muis, by the way. I work at Utrecht University together with Mirko at Data School. We research the impact of technology on society. And I would like to touch upon a couple of different things. So the first one of them being the Fundamental Rights and Algorithms Impact Assessment, which we created 2 years ago. The second one being audits and oversight, and the third one being the education perspective. So first of all, the Fundamental Rights and Algorithms Impact Assessment. It's a tool we created 2 years ago. It was asked for by the Ministry for the Interior in the Netherlands, so they commissioned us to do this research and make this instrument. Which we did with a very interdisciplinary team at Utrecht University. We had Mirko coming from a media studies background. We had Janneke Gerards, who was in one of the panels yesterday, who's a professor in fundamental rights. We had Arthur van Kan, who's a data scientist, and me as being a digital ethicist. And one of our main objectives was creating a very applicable, suitable tool. So testing was made up half of our development time. We tested intensively with real cases, real parties, government parties, since Freya is meant for the government mainly. And it's been in use for 2 years now in the Netherlands. It's really being used. So government organizations use it for their own algorithms, their high impact algorithms. You shouldn't be doing this type of intensive fundamental rights testing for any algorithm, in my opinion, just the ones that have real impacts that might have negative consequences for fundamental rights. And it's been very interesting. It's voluntary, so it's not mandatory to do this human rights impact assessment. Of course, this might change in the future when human rights impact assessment becomes part of the AI Act. And it's just been, to us as researchers, it's been very interesting to see how government organizations deal with these types of impact assessments. Which civil servants take place in filling out this instrument. And something I must say is that it's not a checklist. So we don't really believe in checklists when it comes to data ethics. I would like to hear your opinions on this as well later on in this panel. I don't think you can deal with ethics with a checklist. Anyway, so I was talking about this implementation of the Freya, which is now voluntary. We see that multiple range or multiple different government organizations are using it, ranging from cities, so really small cities, larger cities, also national level organizations, organizations that deal with water management, which are really big in the Netherlands since we have a lot of water. And a large part of this is education. So civil servants that deal with data, this group becomes bigger and bigger. So it's not just the data scientists or the information managers anymore that deal with data and technology, and thus that deal with, you know, public values and questions of ethics within technology. So they have to be trained. And I feel like this is one of the biggest challenges in the coming years, training a growing group of people in questions on public values, ethics, and technology. So this is something we are doing at Utrecht University so far. We've trained around 200 civil servants in questions around public values, ethics, and technology, but we cannot do this alone. Obviously, so we really want to call for a push in education and training. I feel like every employer has a responsibility to train their people in these types of topics. So that's why I was very glad to hear David talking about these roundtable sessions at Randstad. And also, it's not just about professionals, it's about students as well. So data science students learning about ethics, law students learning about ethics and technology, you name it, every type of students receiving some kind of module on data ethics, because it's becoming more and more prominent in every field. I mean, that's what I've been hearing the last couple of days at CPDP as well. It's becoming prominent in every field, so it's so interdisciplinary. We really have to step it up as a society and teach these issues across the board. Okay, so that's me talking. I'm running out of time, right? I want to touch upon one last thing, which is auditing and oversight. So it's one thing to ask organizations to, you know, adhere to their own standards or do an impact assessment, but the next step is really training oversight authorities in monitoring this. So that's been a real challenge also in the Netherlands, which is of course my perspective. And you know, to ask these oversight bodies who are, you know, maybe used to keeping oversight on animal welfare in slaughterhouses, to name an example. AI is also being used now in slaughterhouses, and these people, these inspectors, have to take AI into account as well, which is not their expertise. So these people need to be trained as well. They need to be equipped with suitable instruments to do this auditing. So that's an area I see of becoming growing importance in the future as well. Okay. That was my introductory talk. I'm looking forward to speaking with the rest of the panelists and also with you in the audience later on in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Iris. So after two examples from more from the organizational level, we're moving now more to the policy level, starting with Maria Koomen. Please, Maria.
Thank you, Mirko, and hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Maria Koomen. I lead the EU work for the Open Government Partnership. I feel like there's some feedback. And the Open Government Partnership is a multi-stakeholder initiative, a global multi-stakeholder initiative that takes a principle-based approach following principles of transparency and accountability and participation, grounded by basic systems and frameworks and methodologies to help make governments and governance more open and accessible. In that spirit, we believe, and through over a decade of research and analysis and following the data, we find that this empowers civil society. This also empowers governments. It strengthens democracy, encourages creativity and innovation. It fosters a culture of transparency and accountability, and ultimately emancipates both governments and civil society to do better work. So what does this mean for AI? Looking at AI through the Open Government Partnership, governments and civil society are working on different angles of this, working on government digitization, but also on the governance of AI. So where does civil society fit in this? And I think my place in this panel is not a civil society organization, but rather with a view to both governments and civil society. What are the demands? What are the needs of civil society? And how do we see those manifesting in societies across Europe? So there's a need we see for a rights-based, inclusive, and an adaptable approach to AI governance. What does this mean? This means strong standards and adaptable or flexible policies that are rooted and centered around fundamental rights. This means inclusive approaches to societal challenges that arise from AI. Why? We can justify this in many terms. I won't go into these, but we can talk about it later, in normative terms, in practical terms, and of course, legal terms. Civil society has been gaining strength in numbers, but also in knowledge on this front after decades of work on fundamental rights and technology. We're seeing international coalitions forming at the national level as well, and bringing together local actors. Civil society are coming together on AI, primarily driven by the need for protecting and promoting fundamental rights. So what are their demands? From a transparent, or within the box of transparency, we're seeing demands across the board for involving more and more diverse civil society actors. This means at the EU level, in the risk classification procedures, but also generally in standard setting and policy design, in info gathering initiatives and efforts such as sandboxing and pilot programs on AI audits. For an example, from the Open Government Partnership, we're seeing at the EU level, we're actually working with the civil society organization, the Center for Democracy and Technology, who's speaking in another panel at the same time. We're working with them to bring together a coalition of one of these international coalitions of civil society, together with member states, following the Council of the European Union Working Group conversations, to bring perspectives of civil society to the table with member states. Another example is Bulgaria and France are working on, just to name a couple, on participatory approaches to standard setting and policy designs. Civil society are also asking for open data. So this is a huge, huge spectrum, but to name a couple, they're asking for obliging governments and high-risk AI system users to publish accessible and usable data on not just the systems themselves and their operations, but also, for example, their impact on the environment. Civil society are also asking for open avenues for justice. This could, of course, mean training on legal action, but also mechanisms for rights and redress. This is a very big ask, but it's a very important ask to empower people affected by AI systems, especially when it comes to enforcement. In France, for example, we're seeing in their current action plan, they're working on building citizen feedback mechanisms into the government's use of health data. Another example is in Croatia, we're seeing the government and civil society working with Open Government Partnership to develop trainings, as Iris was talking about, multi-stakeholder trainings on personal data protection, algorithms, and audits. What is needed for a robust oversight and control beyond the voluntary controls that Iris was talking about? From our perspective and from our experience, trust is earned. It's not a given. Self-regulatory approaches are important and a very important, especially immediate part of the spectrum of approaches that can and should be taken, such as codes or guidelines and standards for et cetera. And if done right, they can be an effective supplement to legislation. No surprise, the EU is leading the way on developing legislation, as we've heard throughout the last couple of days, but the AI landscape is changing, of course, rapidly, and the risks we see today are not the same as they will be tomorrow. So there is no silver bullet. We see, essentially, as we take with the Open Government Partnership, there needs to be a comprehensive approach with a whole suite of rights-based systems and inclusive frameworks for checks and balances that need to be centered around our fundamental rights. So in summary, in the horse race between tech and regulation, AI is the horse on steroids, and who knows what it's capable of. That's why there's a need for a rights-based approach to policies and standards and flexible, inclusive approaches. Trust is not given, it is earned. And civil society has years of protecting fundamental rights, emancipate them through rights-based approaches. Never underestimate the power of collaboration. Continuing to engage and collaborate and lean on civil society to make AI governance better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. So indeed, it's a claim that you hear often, that law is always behind the fast technology development. But actually, one might think it should be rather in a way that law is general and abstract in a way that it shouldn't be chased by technological development. I'm very interested in your perspective on policy making, Paul.
Yes, so very encouraged by what I hear. I would say the first issue of ethics is to want to have a law, because there are still many who fight against binding law. In Europe, that fight has been now lost, but before we started the AI Act initiative, if we think of the high-level group on ethics on AI, if you listen to the chairman of that group at the time, he was always giving interviews saying we don't need the law. So I think we have made progress there. The second point of ethics is, I would say, the most important point is to want to comply with the law and to want to be in the center of compliance, not on the outer edge. So let me take the example of the colleague from Randstad saying it will be very hard to know what is actually AI. Well, I don't think so. I think if you want to be in the center of compliance, it will always be extremely easy because, if you have something before you, you will know it's AI. But if you want to be on the outer edge, and if you want to be able to say, well, actually the law doesn't apply to us, well, it's good that it gets difficult. So I think it's about the attitude towards binding rules and democratic control, which we have to discuss in this age where it is very clear that industry, with a lot of money, was pushing ethics to try to avoid the law. That has for the time being failed, but it's a continuing American discourse, and in Congress it works. Now let's move on with this thinking in terms of law. We will now see how the discussions between Parliament and Council come out. We have seen the Parliament has put in a fundamental rights impact assessment obligation. I hope it will be maintained. The next step of the law in the public service is, and I have to say, when I heard your presentation, it's always we need rights-based, that's good, and then it needs to be very flexible. Then I start to think, what does this mean? So to be clear, I believe in the civil service, in the public, in the executive, as distinguished from the legislator, there must be a legal base which allows automation of decision-making through AI. Why? This is about control and oversight, namely of the control of the executive by the democratically elected parliament. Executives are accountable to parliaments, and how does parliament do it? It binds the executive to law. So, my argument is that before an executive, a government, introduces AI as a decision-making tool, I'm not talking about a supportive tool, but as a decision-making tool, there must be a legal base which says you can do this, and under the following conditions. If there is no such legal base, moving the decision from the civil servants, about which we have enormous body of laws, which need to have this and that education, and they are bound by all these standards and so on, in law, is illegal. And I base this argument on the tradition of automation in public service, because automation in the public service already had to be based on a law. If you take the German law, for example, in the General Administrative Code, there is an article which says automation can only take place, decision-making, I'm talking about decision-making, if there is a specific legal base and if the automation doesn't include discretion, exercise of discretion. Discretion can only be exercised by humans. And in two areas, laws were made to allow automated decision-making, namely tax law and social aid. One sees immediately very numerical areas of law. Are these legal bases for automation from 20 years ago, are they good enough for AI? I would say no. Why? Because the concept of automation at the time was mechanistical. Automations, always same input, same output. With AI, that will be different. And why are then these legal bases not enough? Because the purpose of the law is to bind and control the executive through a parliamentary law, which says, you can do this, but not that. So, this all being said, to operationalize all these laws, I think it's extremely important what you're doing, because, of course, the law has to be filled with substance. And let me make a last remark. It is normal that the law contains terms which need to be filled with human experience. So I don't like a discourse which says, when the law says appropriate, it's not sufficiently precise. Or when the law says the data have to be clear, robust, and non-biased, and that's impossible. So it sounds like the law is unreasonable. But the law is not unreasonable. The word appropriate in law has a meaning. And I think in the same way that lawyers need to learn about the technology, technologists need to learn about the normal way the law functions. What does the word appropriate mean? It refers to a corridor of accepted societal practices. So in this context, for example, it would mean that a judge will look at your practice if there's an issue, whether what you're doing is, appropriate. I don't know now the precise formulation and context. And the judge will say, well, okay, let's ask a few professors and see whether you, with your practice of, having checked that the data is not biased, you are in the corridor of what is generally accepted as the state of the art. That's what appropriate means. And of course, appropriate refers also to not overdoing or underdoing things. If you know there's a high risk, if you are, for example, in the area of personnel management, it's about humans, it's about employment opportunities, it's about life, then it will be more appropriate to be more thorough in this testing, while in other areas maybe less. But it is completely normal and necessary that the law uses these terms, because the law is not written for engineers. The law is not the handbook for the program implementer. The law shapes society. And my last remark on this is, we always talk about risk-based legislation. It has become a very fashionable term, but we have to be careful about this. Because if we would only have risk-based legislation, legislation would become the repair shop and part of product development of business. You know, if the product is no good, Sam Altman, then they ask for legislation to bring back the balance and you know, get things right. That's the idea of risk-based. Risk-based is a terminology which is developed by a, I would say, neoliberal thinking which wants to limit legislation. But democracy is about shaping our futures through law. And therefore it is also perfectly appropriate if we want to guide innovation, if we want to reshape our society, if we want to be innovative in society, that we do legislation which goes beyond the present risk. We do it to shape our society in a democratic way, in line with fundamental rights, and not just as a repair shop for business. So that's, I think, also something which should be part of this ethics discourse and the thinking about the relationship between society and technology and the bodies you're working with, governments and the technologists. Technologists have to understand that the most important thing is to understand the power relationship here. And the legislation is a sign, as distinguished from ethics, that we live still, I say still, because in America, who knows, we still live in a world of the primacy of democracy over technology and business models. And it is very important, if we mean it with democracy, that we maintain this primacy and that we don't fall prey to a thinking which subjugates all aspects of society, and including societal democratic rulemaking, to technological thinking. For example, if the law is not as precise as the engineer needs it, it's not a good law. That, I'm sorry to say, is the battle cry of Silicon Valley. In the sentence, we'd rather have no law than a bad law. So there is an element here of a préavis négatif towards democratic decision-making, which by its very nature is always a compromise, therefore never complies with scientific standards, and certainly not with the standard of precision of mathematics, physics, and so on. And I think in this discourse, this operational discourse between ethics for technology and making things work, these elements also have to be introduced, because in the end, your job is also to bring back the technical intelligentsia to a constructive engagement with and in democracy. We need you guys, not just to say this is all shit and it doesn't work and it's unreasonable. We need you to engage in the democratic process, to be part of decision-making, to be part of parties, to join the meetings, to vote, not just when there's national election, but also in your party meeting, and bring your knowledge into the process early on. And don't pursue a discourse which sounds like if everything in this world would comply with our standards of precision of mathematics and physics and so on, it would be better, and politics is just not able to deliver. I think that is a worldview which in the ethics reviews you should also address.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. I'm the moderator, but I can't hold back. Side comment here. Yes, I agree with much of this, but I think it also upholding our democracy also means to prevent that that we have legislation that actually undermines very values of our open democracy and society. And just as we are at a privacy conference, I mean encryption, for instance, that should be end-to-end be provided. within the European Union in the future. Let's dive right into it. We see there's a debate emerging, and I actually sitting on the bench here and looking at the four panelists. I think that there is indeed active participation, especially from some parties within local government organizations, companies, advocacy organizations in shaping these rules and practices effectively. I just go into the discussion that emerged here and give David the opportunity to reply, especially with an eye to what does it mean for you being confronted with the legislation that is coming, and to what extent is it actually burdening you? And aside from the nitty-gritty idea about the definition,
no, but so I think one of the things that is at play here is that kind of this ethical decision and deciding what it is you want to do or should be able to do. That's something that you do every day as an organization. That's what you do in product development. That's what, like deciding this is something we want to do or should do or shouldn't. But at the same time, so there's legislation, what it will probably add is a bit of overhead, and I think this may sound a bit too pragmatic, but kind of complying will involve doing these impact assessments, will involve doing this monitoring, documentation, and those are all good practices, but it's a matter of skill, I think. So deciding to pursue something like that, it will make the scope bigger. It will make it a larger project. That will probably, how do you call it, hurt your velocity a bit. So those are considerations that we make. So I think as an organization, being able to define your own boundaries and decide what to do or what not to do is one thing, but then complying with this procedure is yet another.
Thank you. Maybe Iris, we've heard the comment quite frequently. So what does ethics do when we have the law? And we work in numerous municipalities in the Netherlands. They all move in the same lawful framework. And yet there's so many differences.
Yeah, so I feel like there's two aspects to this question. So the first one is something that is legal might still be unethical. So it's not only the question of, what is possible in a technical sense, what is allowed in the sense of the law, but what do we want as an organization, which ties into the remark David made, what are our own limits, what are our own values and boundaries as an organization. And especially in government organizations, this is very prominent since every municipality has a different coalition. So Paul just told me that here in Brussels there's a coalition of the Greens and the Reds, which leads to more bicycle paths in the city. So it very visibly and palpably affects our public space, the space we live in, the space we navigate in. The same goes for the digital realm. I myself live in Amersfoort, a small city in the Netherlands, and it might have very different political values than 40 kilometers to the right, where there's a right-wing coalition. So these political values shape our digital society on a very local level.
Yeah, actually, we've seen in our impact assessments that an algorithm, say, for poverty prediction in a liberal municipality looks fundamentally different than the same algorithm in a more social democratic governed municipality. So ethics allows us not only to find things that are legal, despicable and sanction them socially, but it allows us also to navigate between a set of different values which are still set within the same legal framework. Maria, tell us more about the opportunities what are the angles that you would subscribe for civil society to develop a more emancipatory potential?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I mean, we've heard a lot about the basic frameworks, the legal frameworks in place that everything needs to be built around. We've heard a lot about the different flavors of ethics and oversight here. I think from the Open Government Partnership perspective, I mentioned that the approach, the collaborative approach, bringing civil society together with governments from a number of different angles, is justified in normative terms, but also practical terms and legal terms. And from a normative perspective, we need to protect fundamental rights. We need to guard our democratic accountability. But we also need rationality and reason. From a practical perspective, monitoring and oversight is costly. It's difficult. It's also not always in the top of the list of governments to build in. In this regard, this is an excellent avenue for the role of civil society, for independent actors. And then also, AI is an incredibly complex field and requires trade-off. And in this respect, transparency and a public accountability are crucial. And legally, in order for transparency and accountability to work, so in order to actually effectively build in civil society, we need frameworks. We need frameworks to operate, but frameworks need to operate on basic systems such as, of course, human rights, but also data protection laws and other laws that here in the European Union we actually have infrastructure for. Elsewhere in the world, we don't necessarily have these frameworks. And as you mentioned, Mirko, there's a myriad of different approaches, legal approaches. Of course, within the EU, we're taking a risk and rights-based approach to AI technologies and systems, but elsewhere we're seeing proposals that are following consumer protection law. And in this regard, there's no homogeneous entry point for frameworks for civil society to be built in. But I think thinking at that local level, national level, EU level, the entry points that I mentioned, building civil society in from the get-go, to think outside the box, but also to think collaboratively and construct creative solutions with regard to accountability and transparency is really the sky's the limit. We're seeing civil society become actors. You mentioned that we have AI in the slaughterhouse. AI is really it's becoming an algorithm. Algorithms are really becoming the next tool that every single part of government will use, and for every single use case within governments, but also in society. But thinking just within governments, there is a role for civil society to help monitor, to help audit, to help ensure that systems are operating as best as they could with the most ethical impacts, as long as there are avenues, of course, for civil society and other impacted groups to actually take to express and make an impact.
Well, let me pick up on here. We have 23 government oversight bodies in the Netherlands, ranging all areas. So the question is, do we need another one for AI? I think this is a question you can answer, and I don't know how big your frustration is about the experience with data protection authorities and how they implemented the law, but we are curious, I guess, to hear who's going to do the audits and the monitoring and of artificial intelligence.
Well, in Europe, the Italian Data Protection Authority was the first and only one who had the guts to say, wait, no, ChatGPT, you don't comply with our law, and to say very straightforwardly, this and this and this and this needs to be changed. So this shows you that certainly data protection will stay at this, as a legal concept, very much at the center of all of this, because the GDPR already also contains the concept of fair processing. Also, the difference between GDPR and the AI Act is that it contains individual rights which people can invoke before courts directly, and they can also force the authority to act. The AI Act is a first generation compromise between industrial policy and protective intentions. It doesn't contain such rights. That's the political nature of the majorities in which we live in the European Commission and in the Parliament. So we will see a lot of legal interesting constructions to compensate that. And I think because if we don't compensate for the absence of these individual rights, you ask that individuals and civil society can make an impact rather than just being heard, cannot be fulfilled. If there's no law where you can force then also a company or a government to comply, no legal avenue, and everything is left to public enforcement, the natural inclination of a civil servant is first of all to do nothing. So if there's no way legally to force a civil servant to do something, so on this question of enforcement, the world of platforms, which is multi-sectoral, multi-sided, the world of AI, which is an all-purpose technology, requires that we are starting to think also about a platformization of enforcement of public economic law. So it is indeed an issue that for every piece of digital law in Europe, or every piece of public economic law, every sector, we have a sectoral regulator. So we have a double fragmentation of enforcement of public economic law in Europe, first by member state, second by sector. My ambition, and this is what I'm working on now with the colleagues in DG Justice, for the next mandate of the Commission is to create what I call as a working title, a common law enforcement legal base. What does it mean? It means it's a very simple piece of law which says the following authorities, and then we count them out. It will not be all the 23, it will be those created by EU law, for the purpose of the enforcement of the following acts, and then there will be data protection, competition, AI Act, DSA, and so on, can exchange case-specific information which they have obtained in the course of their activities for the following purposes. So that we have a new way of learning together on digital and AI, because this is right now the greatest disadvantage of the fragmentation. The law prescribes that all these authorities have to keep the findings of the investigations confidential until they have made a final decision, where, of course, in the reasons they will give some of the elements. But they cannot, if they see, for example, competition authority makes a dawn raid and sees, oh, there's a big issue of privacy or a big issue of discrimination. This authority cannot pass on the files which they may have found in the company system or the algorithm and to the non-discrimination authority or the data protection authority right now. So I think there we can make progress. And one issue which I think must be part of your research and your work on ethics and oversight in the public sector is very closely linked to the functioning of democracy. And I loved what you said, because obviously this is what democracy is about. The law gives the space within which political choices are made. If we introduce AI systems in the public service, we must always ask the question whether this system is as flexible as civil servants are in view of what is natural in democracy, namely that the next government will want to pursue a completely different policy. So one of the questions you have to ask before hundreds of millions are invested in a system which is difficult to train and, sunk costs is, well, if a different party comes in, how will they change the delivery of the policy, the delivery of the service? Because that's what democracy is about. So part of your ethics assessment must be, is this system locking in a structural conservatism, which makes it very difficult for the next government to say, well, actually, we want to completely change the policy? Or is this system actually more flexible than civil servants are? Because, of course, we know that it's also not easy to change the thinking of civil servants, but normally the expectation is that when a new minister comes in with his team, and that's the reason why you don't only change the minister, you change also the top civil servants, they enforce the political change towards the inertia of the lifetime civil servants. And your job is to make sure that the AI system, which is introduced, is at least, I would say, as flexible as is this system of tried and tested policy change. Last remark on the overhead. Of course, there's a cost. So the efficiency test, namely, is it really more efficient to do something with AI, must, of course, include the overhead which is necessary to comply with the law. So it's so your question, when you have to make the choice, are we going to invest in AI or do we leave it to humans? Well, the efficiency gain must be so big that it, of course, also includes good oversight, ethics, retraining, and all this. And if you come to the conclusion that complying with the law has all these costs and AI actually doesn't bring the efficiency which justify these costs, you shouldn't choose AI. I mean, there cannot be an expectation that a technology is introduced illegally because it's cheaper. No, it has to be, of course, introduced in particular in a democratic public service in the middle of the road, absolutely legal, with all compliance, oversight, and control costs and flexibility costs for the future included. And then this whole system must still be much more efficient than if you leave it to humans. That is the challenge before us.
Yep. Yes, you can comment.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul, for this remark. What really struck a chord with me was your argument for flexibility of AI, because as we all know, every 4 years or sometimes more often, the political view changes. Civil servants change their approach to match the political ambition, and AI should also change. This is something we also hear in our work with oversight bodies. Often now, the available instruments are to monitor AI are ex-ante impact assessments and ex-post audits. However, there is not yet a suitable mechanism for continuous monitoring. Sometimes it is said, when you do an ex-ante impact assessment, like the fundamental rights impact assessment, you should do it every year, but it's a very extensive impact assessment. So what if we could have something we have for civil servants, a yearly appraisal interview or a 2-yearly performance review? We should have the same thing for algorithms that also takes the context into account in which it is deployed. Are there major changes to the context into which the algorithm is deployed? Okay, then we should review if the AI is still suitable for its purpose for that specific context. So that's something we've been working on in the Netherlands with 2 oversight bodies, which I think is something that's very called for from practice.
especially as these oversight bodies have so different sectors to watch, and the domain expertise is really relevant. So a new oversight body that just focuses on AI would be insufficient, as the algorithms are so tied to the specific context. So algorithms in a slaughterhouse is something completely different than an algorithm that is used for checking the ID of users online, and it's two different authorities monitoring them. I want to open a little bit up, because I hope there are some burning questions. Yes, there are, and there is a gentleman with a microphone also. Please.
Hello. Hello, thank you for the panelists. I'm Nicolas Blanc. I'm a national secretary for a trade union in France. So lot of things to say. First question: when is the best moment to make a fundamental right assessment, impact assessment? Because I'm a part member of GPI, Global Partnership on AI and on the future of work, and I think it's very important to have a bottom-up governance to complete the future top-down governance with AI Act. And maybe the best way to do that is, for example, with regulatory sandboxes in company. So what do you think about that? And when is the best moment to make that with all the stakeholders? Because I think it's very important to make it with all the stakeholders in companies. And Iris, you said before, we can do that every year. It's very complicated. Before, in a social dialogue, it's very complicated to do that in company. So how to do that? It's a question of acceptability, of open governance. It's very important for all the stakeholders and trade union. We want to be involved in this process. So it's an open question, and I want some answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure Iris has something to say about this.
Well, regarding the first part of your question, when is the best time to conduct an impact assessment? Well, from our experience, we see that the best time is before it's taken into production in AI and you're still able to make changes. Because undoubtedly there will be some changes coming out of this impact assessment, some action points, some points of critical attention that you might otherwise have overlooked, and you need the space to adapt your design or to quit the development. That's also a possibility.
Yeah, and I would even add to that one step before when it's taken into production, like at ideation phase. So that's how we currently do it at Randstad. When you come up with an idea or a potential initiative, then we have a governance structure for kind of ensuring that you request access to data, for example. And during that process, there's another phase where you say if there's AI involved, pending definition, that you get a kind of a vrije light, as we call it. So kind of just a few questions to formulate your ideas and to, formulate potential risks and rewards. And that already helps in kind of deciding whether or not to go through with the idea at all.
Thank you. There was a question in the back, and then the gentleman in the front.
Good morning, and thank you for all your presentations. I'm Dennis Hirsch. I'm a professor at Ohio State Law School, and I run a program that focuses on responsible AI management and also AI law and policy. So I'm very interested in this discussion and the way you're approaching it here in Europe. When I think about AI governance, I think about substance and process. And Iris, it sounds you're talking about process, the impact assessment, right? Which is very useful, but sometimes processes can be hollow if there's not a substantive grounding, a substantive content to which they must aim. And so where do we find that substantive content? And I heard you say, well, sometimes what is legal cannot be ethics, is not ethical. And so my question, I guess, is where do we find the content? If I understand Paul correctly, in a democracy, we find the content, the goal, in the law. And maybe, Iris, what you're saying is the law can be a floor, but we can go beyond the law, but we can't go beneath it. Maybe that's an approach. But even if we look to the law, how do we instantiate the relevant values in the law? Maybe in Europe you already have it. Maybe it's fundamental rights. But it strikes me that fundamental rights are very high level and very hard to actually operationalize. And so are they enough? And do we need new laws to provide that content? And what do those laws look like? And I'll just add that the EU AIA does not provide that. It doesn't provide the content.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're absolutely right. The AI Act basically serves to make the application and enforcement of other laws which already exist more easy. And for the rest, it legalizes what a good engineer would do anyway. And that was, let's say, intentional from the outset. So how does this work? One simple sentence. All laws which humans would have to comply with provide the backdrop for your assessment, 360-degree of what this AI system has to comply with. So nothing can be legal, what the AI does, which would be illegal if a human does it. So what does this mean? It's wrong to say it's only fundamental rights. It is consumer protection rights, it's data protection rights, it's all this non-discrimination. For example, Sandra Wachter, professor in Oxford, wrote an article which shows that 18 notions of mathematical non-discrimination, none of these 18 notions encompasses the full scope and protection of European non-discrimination law. So your question is absolutely right. You need to go to the secondary legislation, to the jurisprudence and so on, and you must make a full legality review, 360-degree, if you are in the high risk group. That is absolutely true. So it's too superficial to only talk about fundamental rights. But I would also say that, of course, when you look at fundamental rights, it's not enough to just look at the Charter of Fundamental Rights. You must look at all the history of jurisprudence behind it, which concretizes it, at least in Europe. The situation in America, I don't know, but I would say that in America you have other advantages. You have the FTC, which deals with 3 areas of law, competition, consumer protection, and privacy, and has, let's say, a practice of guidance which may inform this type of work. So the identification of the substantive laws to comply with is basically the same as the operation when humans are doing their work.
Thank you. Charles, you're next. After the gentleman there.
Alessandro Mantelero, Polytechnic University of Turin. Just a comment, because I fully agree with Paul that this is a problem of a power relationship, and the point is how we frame this power relationship. It seems to me that in the different presentation, we deeply rely on the law. I agree, it's better than very vague ethical approach sometime in the past, but at the same time, also the title of the panel is that there is not only the law, and there is ethics, and there are social issues. Ethics is not only human rights, or more correctly, human rights are a specification of some ethical values. So I'm a bit concerned about squeezing everything in only law and law-based approach. This is much more that is not addressed by law. And the question is, what are your instruments to address this much more in terms of ethics and in terms of other terms that is not present in many discussions, that is the societal impact? Because many problems are about the communities are not about the fact that this is illegal or this is against the ethical value, but they simply don't want some kinds of application. So the problem is how we frame these kind of issues that are outside human rights and sometimes also outside an ethical framework. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. And this touches also a little bit upon the definition problem that came up in the beginning. As many data practices we see on a day-to-day basis in the Netherlands do not qualify for being called artificial intelligence or not even a decision tree. Most often it's a regression analysis or something like that. So they do not qualify for artificial intelligence, yet they can lead to considerable harm on the people that are affected by them. I speak about the Dutch Fraude scorecard, which is an example, a spreadsheet used by bureaucrats to decide whether someone has a right to a place to live or a pension or subsidies and so forth. And even the so-called child benefit scandal, which is heralded as the go-to example for bad AI, had nothing to do with artificial intelligence. So these practices are indeed relevant, especially as they are not always covered by the definition. We developed some instruments. You work with them in Randstad, so maybe you share quickly some of the practice that you use.
Yeah, so I think part of the answer is transparency and being able to show, indeed good engineering practice by now is to publish model cards to kind of explain in layman's terms what these models or systems do, to publish data cards to kind of explain what the data distributions look like. So that's one part of the answer. But then still, I mean, this is also part, I think, of the legislation, right? This is part of the requirements for high-risk systems. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
Do we have until 10 o'clock?
We have until 10 o'clock.
Well,
we have 4 minutes.
Yeah, I can cut my thing very short because we had a discussion yesterday at the book club session discussing Alessandro Mantellaro's book, which touches upon lots of these sorts of things. So I don't want to repeat that, except that the remark I made yesterday was that what we're in this area is an area of political theory. It's an area of political theory in several senses. One is the theory about shaping institutions and whether or not existing institutions, whether they're parliaments or governments or other deliberative bodies and mechanisms, are now insufficient to govern AI, and whether we need to think about not just workarounds and strategies for working within the institutions, but fundamentally rethinking the role of those sorts of democratically based institutions. And if that's the case, then maybe there's a kind of crisis of legitimation of those institutions, which may impact upon the nature of democratic society. Because if we're talking about the role of civil society and NGOs, and I fully support that, and also the role of experts and expertise, and I fully support that, nobody mentions whether or not we can equip existing parliaments and so on with the necessary tools to do the job. And that means that if we're regarding AI as a kind of exceptional case, requiring exceptional solutions using expertise, using civil society, using public engagement, then we have to rethink the basis of a democratic order in order to retain what we cherish about democracy. So I think that there's a problem there, and it requires thought about how we shape institutions and how we legitimize them.
Yeah, let's not hang it too high. Controlling atomic power, controlling genetic engineering. We have faced extremely complex technological issues and democratic control before. Everything you say about expertise is correct. Of course, the bodies called upon to exercise control need to be equipped with expertise, and they also need to be able to cooperate. But that we need to reform and reshape our democratic institutions and the rule of law and separation of powers and so on because of AI, well, I think that's hanging it a little bit too high. The simple fact is, if something is uncontrollable, we must have the guts to say no to it. And we have done this before in human history. We have, at least in Europe, a very strong history of technology regulation. So the issue is not that the whole world needs to be reshaped so that AI can thrive and be sold. But the issue is whether AI can be designed in such a way that there is no black box, that there is no power concentration, that democracy thrives and fundamental rights and other pieces of law, the rule of law, is secured. And that is the job before us. So it is AI which has to adapt to the primacy of democracy and the primacy of fundamental rights and the primacy of the human imperative, and not the other way around.
Great closing words, Paul. I want to thank my panelists. Thank you for your contributions and the discussion. Thank you, audience, for being here in the first panel of the morning, and for your questions as well. And I wish you all a good day. Thank you.